My conversation today is with returning guest Angel Millar. As editor-in-chief of the Masonic periodical, the Fraternal Review, produced by Southern California Research Lodge, Angel has overseen the production of high-quality Masonic education and discourse as its latest custodian. Typically showcasing a variety of guest editors from the local region and the broader Masonic fraternity, this month, October 2024, Angel has also donned the guest editor hat to release a special issue, a Masonic First, investigating Freemasonry and Paganism. He and I sat down today to talk about the issue, which is available for purchase in the link below, as well as the Norse mythology of the poetic Eddas, pagan reconstructionism, and much more. I'm Ike Baker, and this is the Arcanvm Podcast. All right. I have with me once again Brother Angel Millar. He is officially the first returning guest in almost 2 years of the podcast. So it's a great pleasure to be speaking with you again.
Thank you. Likewise.
Great. Yeah. So, well, first off, how you been? How you doing?
I've been busy, but all good. All good. Working on a couple of books. Well, just finished a couple. So,
All right.
yeah.
Yeah, I've been watching, watching some of your social spaces, and it's just good to see that you are remaining consistently involved. I think that's an important thing. I think you're an important voice. So thanks for your continued efforts. But I think tonight we're going to talk about you releasing an issue on Freemasonry and Paganism for the Fraternal Review. For anybody that's not necessarily familiar, right? My audience is not only Masonic, but for anyone that's not familiar, the Fraternal Review is a regular Masonic publication that's put out by Southern California Research Lodge in South Pasadena. The issue is going to be a first for the magazine. Is that right?
Well, as far as I'm aware, I'm pretty confident in saying that it's almost certainly the first ever Masonic magazine issue dedicated to paganism and the pagan revival and connections between Freemasonry and the pagan revival. So, yeah.
That's awesome. That's especially the Fraternal Review seems to, at least in the last year, it's really been kind of getting quite a bit of circulation. It's quite a popular issue, Masonic fraternity. But before we dive into the issue itself, I want to ask, how did you initially get involved with Fraternal Review? Because you're very, very much involved with the publication, are you not?
Well, I'm the editor-in-chief of Fraternal Review, but I'm unusual in that it's published, as you mentioned, in California, from the Southern California Research Lodge, but I'm actually in New York. I'm the only active participant that's in another state and on the other side of the country. So, well, it's pretty short story. Of course, they had previous editor-in-chiefs. So I basically, he didn't want to continue, and they asked me if I would do it, and I said yes, even though I felt I was too busy. But I also thought I should probably do it.
It's very Masonic.
Yeah, right.
Very Masonic thought to have.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, if you wouldn't mind laying out maybe the basic premise of the issue, and really, I guess I'm interested. I mean, you've covered a lot of ground. You have written on the history of esotericism, of Freemasonry, really, truly quite an astounding body of work. But what brought this particular branch of the Western traditions about for you as a subject of interest?
Yeah, well, we've done a couple of issues on fringe masonry, such as the Ordo Templi Orientis and the Golden Dawn, and other orders that some they're going to mention, but aren't necessarily explored in depth in in a Masonic context. So we did that. I think we did one over each year for a couple of years, And I wanted to kind of build on that, but do something a little bit different. And just digging into my own history a little bit, I do talk about some of the material, such as the Night of Scandinavia, in my second book, which was published in 2014, but was actually written about 7 years before that. And I do. Actually, the first lecture I ever gave at a lodge, which was in 2002 in New York, I actually talked about some of the material there, and it's been revived for this issue. It was at one point published by the Societas Rosicruciana in Civitadibus Federatis. I'm no longer a member of that society, but I wanted to revive it, edit it, and get it a little more widely circulated. So that's and other than that, I suppose you could say one of my interests is in particularly Northern European paganism, not particularly Wicca or Druidry, although we do cover those in the issue. So I was interested in exploring all of that in a serious way, hopefully.
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, the current of erudition, I think was kind of spearheaded by some modern Freemasonic authors, Arturo de Hoyos and even some of the work that somebody like Paul Reyna was doing. But it's sort of spread throughout the larger communities, and so
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think in regard to fringe masonry and such orders such as the Golden Rosicrucians or the quote unquote Illuminati, or African Brothers, Freemasons have been writing about that for the last couple of 100 years at least, and you find quite a lot of material about that in mid 19th century in Masonic encyclopedias sometimes. But so I think Masonic scholarship has a long history, but yeah, hopefully.
Well, it's improved. It's improved too because
for sure, of course, definitely.
Somebody wrote me the other day. They said, I just spent X amount of money on Manly Palmer Hall's The Secret Teachings of All Ages, and it seems I've wasted my money because, not all of it is factual. And,
Right.
I heard you, Ike, talking about it on a podcast, and that's why I went and checked it out. And I was basically like, all right, I'm not going to send you any money. So, but the thing is,
No.
there's a different type of erudition, then so there's a factual truth and there's a spiritual truth, and I find for a certain era, those things coexist very nicely. But I think those things are both being elevated. One thing that I think would be interesting, if you wouldn't mind speaking on it a little bit to whatever extent that you can, I think it'd be interesting for myself and for whoever's listening to talk about the Night of Scandinavia.
Yeah, so I actually do touch on this in my second book, which is currently unavailable. But I asked a New York brother, Franklin Rings, if he would read the initiation ritual and then discuss it. In essence, it is what's the 34th degree of the ancient and primitive rite of Memphis and Mizraim. And it was written probably around 1890, or at least towards the end of the 19th century. So it's quite old. And it is, in effect, initiation, symbolic initiation by the god Odin. So one is initiated into the Odinic mysteries, one might say. And, in some respects, one can criticize it because it is more or less wholesale. Taken from the poetic Edda and the prose Edda, two medieval Icelandic texts that preserve ancient Norse mythology, and that really are the two primary source texts for understanding Norse pre-Christian religion and spirituality and belief. And a lot of it, honestly, is just taken wholesale. So in one sense, you might criticize it and say, well, it's not that creative. And one could also say that it's definitely limited by the time. There's a much, much better understanding of the Norse belief now. And we do find Norse mythology and gods being mentioned really pretty early even from just after the mid 1800s. But there's often errors. There isn't really any errors in this, I would say, because it is sort of copied and pasted. But nevertheless, even for that time, I think, 1890s, late 19th century, it does show some sophistication that they were turning to the Eddas and not to more questionable sources. They were at least going back to the original source material. So that's in its favor. But yeah, essentially, one is initiated by Odin, taught the Norse mysteries, and is actually given what's referred to as a runic cipher. But at the end of the initiation, as you probably know, in some Masonic rituals, you would be given a cipher at some point, which is just a kind of alphabetic code. And it's in reproductions that you find, it's very poorly drawn because whoever has copied this doesn't really understand what they're copying. It probably went through a few hands, but it's actually a version of the younger Futhark, which has 16 runes in it. But that's what it is.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me. The Memphis Mizraim is something that I'm very much interested in. I'm curious to get your thoughts on why something like that, right? Because a lot of it is heavily Egypticized.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And so then one might think, oh, this seems out of place, but then on the other hand, with the 90 some odd degrees that are in what's available of it, I mean, one could imagine that you're being initiated through the course of the ritual trajectory as a priest of every temple. But I'm interested to hear your thoughts on maybe why. I mean, you've probably studied the ritual more than I have.
Right. Yeah, I've certainly studied it. But yeah, I think it's interesting, right? Because the first to the 33rd degree are basically parallel to the Scottish Rite degrees of Freemasonry that most regular Freemasons are familiar with in one form or another. But and after that, it's largely Hermetic, especially, as you say, very much colored by ancient Egyptian symbolism. But the 34th degree, yes, is Norse. It's very strange, but it's the first degree that takes it from the Scottish Rite and sort of elevates it into this sort of more esoteric realm. But why it would be is interesting, and you do find, we actually reproduce some snippets of text that I think are important from the 19th century by significant Freemasons. And you do find, what might be regarded as Masonic intellectuals or Masonic thinkers, from about 1868 all the way through the 19th century, talking about how they believe Freemasonry comes from the Norse mysteries. And this might be right or it might be wrong. It doesn't really matter. I mean, there's certainly no proof of that. But something is certainly brewing at that time. I would think some of it, at least later in the century, is related to Richard Wagner's operas, which are reviving, Germanic myths in a very dramatic and almost ritualistic fashion with, 4-hour-long operas. So that's probably part of it, but it does seem to slightly predate that as well. And of course, there are, maybe other influences, maybe some of them we're not aware about. If you go back in time, certainly, you find the Rosicrucian Johannes Burrus as well. I think he was 16th century, or maybe a little later, 17th century. Taking an interest in runes and this kind of thing as well. So there's a little bit of a history, but certainly by mid 19th century, it's really sort of launching in Freemasonry. Seems to die off early 20th century, probably because of the World War I.
Right. You mentioned, and I wanted to bring up the three extracts of prominent 19th century Freemasons arguing that Freemasonry is descended from the ancient Norse. Now, again, right, I kind of mentioned that in the beginning. We mentioned that the older forms of erudition, they might be pointing towards something that is worth looking at, really, and digging further, but they didn't have the same tools of erudition. So,
Oh, that's right.
given that, um, in what context are they pointing to? Are they pointing to Freemasonry as descending from a Norse form of stonecraft as an allegory? Or are they pointing directly at something religio-philosophical, something like a mystery?
Yeah. Yeah, well, they definitely see the Norse symbols as parallel to Masonic symbols, and in some cases even claim that Masonic symbols are descended from the Norse. So the probably the main thesis was by a New Jersey um, governor called George F. Ford, and he wrote a very large book on the antiquities of history, and his main thesis was that Freemasonry descended from the Norse guilds, and if you look at, for example, a Norse temple, it has Odin, Thor, and Frey being worshipped on these pedestals, and this must be where the three columns of a Masonic lodge come from. And it should be said that people tend to think, oh, well, the only serious contender for an alternative history to Freemasonry coming purely from the medieval guilds, which is beyond dispute, would be, they would think of the Knights Templar theory. But of course, what people don't realize is there's actually been hundreds of theories about Freemasonry. And basically, they all boil down to the same proposition, and that is the symbols of the Masonic Lodge look like this other thing, whether that's Christianity or Kabbalah or alchemy or the Norse or the Druids or the Druze or the Aztecs or whatever it is. These things in the Masonic Lodge look like these other things in this earlier thing, so therefore it must come from that. But I always say that you're sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, really. And what is interesting about Freemasonry is that it looks like all of these traditions when these traditions don't look much like each other. Does the Aztec religion look much like Norse religion or Christianity? But somehow Freemasonry somehow looks like them all. And it's kind of unfortunate that members don't always think very discerningly and trying to follow history, but nevertheless, even in these mistakes, you kind of get interesting ideas popping up and interesting movements, and eventually interesting rituals like the Night of Scandinavia degree. So,
yeah, to your point, I think that Freemasonry, at least in its current iteration, if it is anything truly deeper than what it seems ostensibly to be, a fraternity that inculcates morality and does charity work and liberally distributes research. And really, I've said this before on other podcasts, but really I just keep wanting to give him some due. It was Stuart Cleland who made me really step back and start thinking about these ideas. But looking at it and traveling and speaking over the last couple of years, I really see it as a forum for these kinds of discussions. It's kind of, I don't want to say necessarily that it's a Rorschach, right? But it's certainly some kind of canvas that contains many colors. And I oscillate between, well, is it just because it contains so much? It's got a little bit of this and a little bit of that, or is it striking at something that is, a core to these traditions? Is it striking at the telos, the purpose that kind of stripping things in a way of their outer trappings?
Yeah, well, I think that's probably what it is, because we can follow the history through text back to about 1390 to 1450, somewhere around there. So well into the medieval period. So I think people see all kinds of things in it. I don't think those things are there, but I think certainly it captures the essence of something that shows up in a lot of different places. And in regard to Freemasonry being this place where we can discuss things, And I think this also applies to Freemasonry being this kind of movement that creates all of these different rituals, 90 plus in the rites of Memphis and Mizraim, etc. That there's a limit on what you can discuss if you're, if you're a believing Catholic or believing Muslim or even believing Buddhist or anything really. But and you certainly can't take the Catholic ritual and start messing with it and creating new rituals. But Freemasonry, it doesn't claim to be a religion. So, and it encourages people to practice whatever their religion is. So people can read things into it. And sometimes that's frustrating because they read things into it that are not there and claim that they found some historical, argument. But on the other hand, it can also be a lot more creative, and people can discuss philosophical ideas that may not be in Freemasonry, but are somehow parallel to it, or have, of course, historically made up their own rituals as well and founded initiatic societies, whether that's the Golden Dawn or something else. It's a bit more vibrant potentially.
Yeah, sort of a democratization of the mysteries, or at least a setting of a template, right?
Right, exactly. And that is the thing, the members that are engaged ultimately, at least philosophically, are engaged in trying to find what is the mystery, right? Or what is the key to the mystery. Whereas no matter how devout you may be as a religious person, that's not necessarily your aim, although it might be, of course, for many believers. And I'm not saying that being religious is bad. It's actually, there are a lot of very extremely intelligent religious believers, and certainly at least as much as atheists or agnostics or occultists. And theology is difficult, and should not be brushed aside.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with you. I find some people might roll their eyes, but I mean, I would be hard pressed to find two people who challenged me more intellectually, because I take their writing seriously, and C.S. Lewis and Chesterton.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Those guys changed the whole game for me.
Yeah,
Obviously historically too, but I didn't understand the historical context when I first encountered them. So I was able to just have this incredible experience,
Yeah. Well, Chesterton is sort of an Oscar Wilde of Catholicism, and it turns everything on its head. So makes you see everything anew.
I feel like there could be no, I don't know. It seems like some sort of proto-surrealism listening to him. It's like part Monty Python and part like, absolute brilliance,
Yeah, that's right.
But I want to posit this or ask you this question, because you said that you explained earlier that the Northern European traditions are of interest to you. So in a lot of the research that I've done, and please correct me if I'm wrong, at least to my understanding as of right now, there's a fairly limited amount of historical record in terms of primary source texts in Northern European pagan traditions from, I don't know, maybe before the Roman period. So that said, what are some of the challenges in contextualizing the history and practices of early paganisms, or are we relying on something else?
Well, that's a good question. So in regard to the Norse, yes, I mean, really, or let's say Northern Europe more broadly. Of course, you have the poetic and prose Edda of medieval Iceland, although recording Norse myths further back. Other than that, you have the Norse or Icelandic sagas. But beyond that, of course, there's a lot of different fairy tales and myths and legends, and even literature such as Chaucer, where things kind of get caught up in it, or with Britain as well, the Arthurian legends, or the legend of legends plural of Sir Gawain, because there's actually a lot of them. So I think if you're a purist and you only want to look, say, at Norse mythology, it's going to be very limited. But I think if you actually can look a little broader afield, you can get a different sense Obviously, we can never really know what it was like to be a Norse pagan, or what it was like to be an early Christian, or to be, a believer in, an ancient Egyptian deity, and in actual Memphis a few thousand years ago. But I think if you look a little more broadly, you can see that there's some consistency in Northern European traditions, particularly. So it's spreading over a long period, maybe 1,000 years.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I barely remember what it was like to be alive in the 1990s. So
Right.
everything's a reconstruction,
Yeah.
everything is dripping with nostalgia. Was there anything in particular that surprised you in your research for this article, or let's say the articles that inspired this issue?
Um, Well, I wouldn't say surprised me, because the articles I drew on, I wrote a couple of articles, one of which looks at stonemasonry and runes from around 800, the year 800, somewhere around there, a little bit later, all the way up to probably 12th century, 13th century. And so that I had already written about and spoken about 20 years ago. But and then another article I wrote was based on an interview that I did with a contemporary Germanic magician, occultist, which I conducted in 2007. He was the head of an order, well, he would say guild, but Freemasons would probably say order. So let's just say order. So he was the head of a runic magical order called the Gildry, which just translates as magic order or magician's order. And yeah, so I reworked that interview into an article about the similarities of the Gildry and Freemasonry. His name was Ganvorder. He was a photographer at the time, a pretty impressive photographer. And originally I was going to include it in my second book, but I decided not to, as they basically went dormant, along with a couple of other similar orders or guilds at the time that were also headed by Freemasons that were concentrating on the runes. But then I thought it would be worth reviving for this issue, just to look at this now, at least for the time being, now dormant magical order that most people have never heard of.
Aside from a question that comes to my mind is, aside from, references to maybe Athelstan and certain uh, kings of the British Isles and that area, um, have you encountered anything in, let's say, uh, the literature of the old charges or related to that might, because a lot of them list, they have a litany of the historical personages
Right.
and sort of environs that Freemasonry was passed down, and there's a lot more than just a handful of them. I mean, I believe there's over 100 that they consider old charges.
Yeah.
It's like a few big ones. Have you
Yeah.
encountered any mentions of more of the Northern European stuff early on?
Uh, no, I would say with the old charges, most of them are based on the Cook manuscript, or at least some manuscript that was almost identical to the Cook manuscript. But no, there's not really any mention of Northern Europe, or Northern European pre-Christian tradition anyway. But they're not really a history. They are an attempt to create a mythology, which is why it talks about the establishing of two pillars and writing the arts and sciences on it, and Pythagoras, and things like this. So that doesn't really have any bearing one way or another. But in regard to Athelstan, you know what his name means, right? It
No.
means it means literally noble stone. So that's probably one reason why he is mentioned in that. The other reason being he was the first king of all England. So he had, cachet, but also had the right name for stonemasons. Yeah,
That's a great bit of trivia, actually. I
yeah,
like. So, uh, how exactly do you think that this particular issue might challenge some assumptions about Freemasonic history and interpretation, or
yeah.
or or let's say you mentioned that you talked about fringe masonry, but is there another way that you think this will situate itself in the general oeuvre of the review?
Well, in regards to possibly challenging or giving a different side of the history of Freemasonry, I think there are a couple of things, and one is, I did look at connections between stonemasonry and runes, uh, from the medieval period, which is I don't think anyone has ever written about before. Certainly not when I originally wrote about it 20 years ago. So that certainly that would change things significantly because I think I'm correct that there's a strong implication that not only did they absorb the runes as letters, but absorb some kind of philosophy of the runes. Notably in England, the runic alphabet, quote unquote, actually expanded in number from 24 up to about 32, 33, somewhere around there. Depending what part of England. And the last couple of runes to be added were called Calc and Stan. And Stan, as in Athelstan, means stone, and Calc may have different interpretations. I think the most likely one is chalk. It could be lime. It's also been suggested it might mean chalice. Chalice sounds very sort of mystical, so that's probably why it gets mentioned. It could mean sandal, but I think the most likely interpretation is chalk or lime. The word calcstan, so the two runes together, that is a compound word, and it means limestone, which is used in mortar. It's also used in manuscripts as well for preparing the parchment. So I think, the runes are not like magical signs in that, in sort of Enochian or something like that, where it might mean something really sort of occult, some demonic talisman. They're not like that. They typically refer to things in the ordinary world, or that's money or cattle, or or the aurochs or thorn or whatever it is. It's not something out of this world necessarily, or at least in an occult sense. And so it seems pretty likely that they would have adopted chalk and stone, especially with the rise in building cathedrals and churches, and the prominence of stonemasonry and its importance to Christianity. So it's quite possible that some kind of mythology of stonemasonry affected the runes, and the runes in turn affected stonemasonry. So, and they were later used as masons' marks as well. So and if that is the case, then it kind of pushes back at least the possibility of some sort of esoteric or doctrine or some kind of mythology of stonemasonry by 300-400 years, maybe more than that. So that would be pretty significant. I think the other way that it would probably challenge convention is that this issue definitely shows that there is an interest in paganism from Freemasons going back before there was in the general public. I mean, the interest in paganism in Freemasonry predates Wicca by almost a century. So predates the Germanic revival of the 20th century by more than that, probably. So, that's sort of interesting. And there may be parallel traditions. One of the authors focuses on parallels between Freemasonry and Wicca, and historical connections as well, but makes the argument that they have parallel symbols, and you can find these symbols going back, several hundred years, and that Wicca itself might be connected to sort of cults or guilds, such as the Horsemen's were, that themselves were influenced by Freemasonry. So there might be some kind of sort of parallel between sort of modern pagan, say, underground cults long before the sort of Wicca and other more popular forms emerged, and then they were much more secret, obviously. So I think that's pretty interesting as well.
Just so that I guess we don't take too much for granted on the part of the listener, could you situate the runes themselves a little bit more in terms of where they fit into, esotericism, and what kinds of symbols they are.
Yeah, sure. Perhaps we should have touched on that. Yeah, so they go back around about 2,000 years, at least in terms of the historical evidence. They were mostly written on wood, so they could go back significantly more than that. Wood rots away, so we wouldn't have a lot of evidence, but probably almost all of the inscriptions that were ever written. Some were written on stone, of course, but essentially they were the alphabet of the Northern European tribes. There's no definitive answer of where they came from. They definitely have parallels to the Greek alphabet and to the Roman alphabet and to some Northern Italian alphabets for sure. And then as the Northern European tribes spread out, of course, they took that alphabet with them and it changed over time. So by about the 8th century, it gets reduced in Scandinavia and then it begins to expand in number in England. And today, certainly, it's sort of split between academics and esoteric practitioners or occultists or pagans or neo-pagans or whatever we want to say. And academics would say that there's nothing magical about them at all and they're just letters. And occultists would say that no, they are actually magical signs, and that if you meditate on a particular rune, then something will happen, that you will get some sort of power associated with it, or you'll be able to change your life or your environment in some way, and that's an ancient practice. I mean, I think in regards to the runes, what really was an ancient practice is really lost to time and what they really meant. My sense is that you do find references in some texts to a rune being magical, such as the need rune, for example, or carving twice the name of Tyr on a sword, which was Tyr was written by a single rune, normally the T rune. But generally, I think probably what was originally meant by rune was probably more like an enchantment or a song, a magical song. That's certainly how it's used in Finland, and certainly early inscriptions that refer to a rune refer to an entire inscription, not just to one letter. But regardless of what it may have been, and it's certainly a little cloudy. Today it's sort of split between academics and esotericists. And, certainly for several hundred years from Johannes Burrus, practitioners have been trying to create new occult systems with it, or to discern some kind of primordial system through it, which is kind of interesting in some respects.
Yeah, I know that. Well, first of all, the Hebrew alphabet is kind of similar too, and that's another big alphabet, or I should say,
Sure.
symbol system within the Western esoteric traditions. And we receive it with its numerical values, and similarly, Greek has the same thing. There's also certain concepts associated with the Hebrew letters, and Beit is house, Gimel is camel, etc., and things like that. So it wouldn't be completely out of left field that they would have had similar ideas. Again, to your point, how they use that is a subject of debate. But I think that the important thing, right, especially pertaining to Freemasonry, is that symbols can change you. We call it magic, but I mean that's what the symbols of Freemasonry did for me, by elevating our thoughts to. Or really giving everybody who's a part of the Freemasonic tradition, because as you say, we added rooms onto the house with things like the Golden Dawn, Martinism, Memphis Mizraim. So these things are now more available outside of regular Masonry, but it gives you a chance, an opportunity, and a system to be able to elevate your thoughts away from the humdrum, and then possibly integrate that elevated state into the humdrum, hopefully, right? Maybe. But I do know that I've seen runes in a more modern context used a lot for divination, like the rune
Right,
stone.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's the most typical use, for sure.
Have you toyed around with that at all, just for shits and giggles, or?
Well, yeah, I certainly have, of course. Yeah, yeah, indeed.
Great. I mean, do you also? I'm curious. Do you have any sort of ancestral tie to the area that kind of brings up your interest in that in Northern European or Norse kind
Yeah.
of spirituality?
Well, I'm English, so and the English came from Europe,
Yeah.
you know. So yes, I mean not. I mean, as far as I know, not from Scandinavia, but I haven't really delved into that. But actually, although my family does look pretty Scandinavian, actually.
Right. I was thinking that about it's like, I could definitely see some more maybe Germanic or Scandinavian in you and stuff. And that's, I definitely feel a pull to it's no surprise or for anybody that listens to me regularly rant. I've been I've been accused by by Jamie Lamb. He says I exhibit a Plato chauvinism.
Jamie Lamb's a good guy, so I'm not going to get in the middle of that. So.
No, he's one of my, I mean, very dear brother. He's one of my
Mhm. Of
closest friends.
course, yeah,
But I'm Greek, so I'm Greek and
right.
Italian. So I draw from those traditions very heartily because I feel a connection to them. So when
Yeah,
does the issue come out?
we'll be out the first week of October. Yeah, probably close to the beginning.
All right, good,
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, yeah, definitely.
And where can people get it?
Well, they can go to the Southern California Research Lodge website. So if they just do a search for that, they'll find it, and then you can download it or order a hard copy because it is a full color magazine. So, or they can sign up for next year. There are 11 issues in the year, and we try and explore some unusual subjects that you won't find explored elsewhere. So,
Well, yeah, I wanted to ask, what is the vision moving forward for the Fraternal Review? I mean, I
yeah,
just submitted a bunch of articles myself
you
for
did. That's right.
the November issue
Do
of,
you want to say what it's on?
yeah, it's just uh the life and works of Brother William Wynne Westcott, who was
Mm-hmm.
a major um I would say, a major contributor by way of the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia, just regular craft Freemasonry. Obviously, he was English, but he was one of the founders. Really, I mean, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, as it came to us, was arguably his brainchild.
Right,
So,
exactly.
so I really wanted to showcase some of his work, not only to honor him
Yeah,
because he's been whitewashed out of a lot of contemporary Freemasonry. He's been
right.
dismissed as a weirdo and an eccentric, but he was one of, I mean, they considered this guy a scholar. He was erudite, in his time, and
Yeah,
he spent time, he entertained everybody. Steiner, Theodore Reuss, Kenneth Mackenzie, Fred
yeah,
Hockley, like, he knew all those guys. So
yeah,
that was great that you guys let me guest edit that because again, it's right, William Wynne Westcott, close to my heart as a Golden Dawn magician. But I like the fact that you guys were pulling from Mason's voices all over the place, and there's so much variety in the monthly issues that you guys put out. It's like you can never really get bored. You're never singing the same old song and dance. So
yeah.
what's the vision there? Is there a broader vision?
Well, I think the vision is to keep exploring subjects that other Masonic periodicals typically won't, or at least to explore them in new ways. And, alchemy is certainly a theme that we touch on pretty regularly. Hermeticism, Rosicrucianism, fringe masonry. I think we're the only Masonic magazine to really explore, the Ordo Templi Orientis, Golden Dawn, and even Richard Kaczynski, a really famous scholar of Aleister Crowley and the Ordo Templi Orientis. He contributed a great article a few months back to the issue on fringe masonry, and yeah, so we like to explore those subjects. We do explore more typical subjects for Freemasonry, such as maybe the working tools or something like that. And then we also sort of get a little bit playful and philosophical at the same time, and maybe explore some movie in light of Freemasonry, such as Star Wars or Fight Club or something like that. I mean, we're not saying that there's any historical connection, but you can see philosophical parallels, or it's an interesting way of talking about it. So I think the overall aim is to kind of push the envelope and talk about interesting things that you're not going to find elsewhere. I think so far it's worked pretty well.
Yeah, a lot of visibility.
Yeah.
It's really great. You're offering an opportunity too for other Masons to come and guest edit, and
Yeah, that's right.
it's just incredible,
Yeah,
because it's you're weaving the community closer, and now we can do that more easily with the internet.
for sure. Yeah, and that's right. And we do get a lot of different voices. Every issue is guest edited by a different guest editor, although I'm the editor in chief and can be ruthless at times when people go off track and don't do what they're supposed to do. But I think there was no changes with you, or virtually none. So
I mean, I understand, right? If you want to have a good quality product, somebody has to be the head chef, right? You have to have
yeah,
one or two people that know what this is about.
for sure, for sure. Yeah. So yeah, no, but we definitely have a lot of different interesting guest editors, and sometimes we have articles from important voices in England or elsewhere, mostly American. But yeah, so it's definitely you definitely get a range, and yeah, I think that's pretty interesting, pretty exciting.
Yeah. Um, One thing I did want to ask you about, you recently did a panel with two brothers who are very dear to me,
Right.
Brother Joe Martinez and Jamie Lamb. How was
Yes.
how was that?
Yeah, it was interesting. It was on fringe masonry. And it was for the Southern California. Was it for the Southern California Lodge Research? Maybe it was for the California State more
I
broadly,
think it was
actually.
Grand. I think it was under the auspices of Grand.
Yeah, I think you're right. But yeah, it was good. Yeah, we were discussing different aspects of fringe masonry and what is it, and how it impacts Freemasonry and vice versa. So yeah, I mean, it's always good to speak on those things for sure.
Yeah, is that available to view, or do you have to buy it, or
Um,
is it just a one-time live
I,
stream?
I don't know actually. I think it might have been just a one-time live stream, but I'm not certain.
Okay, I'll check it out. If it's still around, I'll link to it in the video. I'll also link to the Fraternal Review. So
Oh,
for
great.
anybody
Yeah,
that's looking for a quick way to get right to the product, it'll be in the
that
about
would be
section.
great. Yeah,
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah.
So I wanted to give you, the two canned questions that everybody gets. Do you have anything else upcoming that you want to plug?
Well, I just finished a new book, is definitely my most esoteric, but it won't be out for a couple of years because publishing moves really slowly, as you probably know. But other than that, people can check out my website, angelmillar.com. Yeah, so that's really it.
Awesome. So, for anybody that's listened to this podcast this evening and or this morning, and we kind of honed in here, which I like because I'm coming on 2 years now of doing extremely general interviews. So this is
Yeah.
a little bit more finely honed, and I really enjoyed that. So thank you for giving me that direction, giving me the opportunity to talk about something specific. Um, would you recommend three resources for people to sort of maybe dig a little deeper? That could be, the book that you wrote earlier on, but just three resources that you'd recommend to somebody that wanted to go deeper on the Norse tradition and connections with Freemasonry.
Well, for the Norse traditions, I think I'd have to recommend obviously the poetic and prose Eddas and then some of the sagas. But in regards to connections to Freemasonry, that's pretty tough. Um, since what's out there is generally pretty dubious, especially historically. So it's difficult to say, I hate to say that, but it's true. Stephen Flowers wrote a short book on Freemasonry, which is mostly based on George F. Fort's thesis and Guido von Licht. I personally regard them as extremely dubious, but it's nevertheless interesting. And he also has a personal account which isn't especially favorable to Freemasonry, but it's still interesting to read. So if you're not looking for something academic, but looking for some sort of synopsis of how people have seen connections to Freemasonry, whether you believe it's true or not, then that would probably be one book. But otherwise, I think we've probably got more in the issue than you'd find out otherwise.
Excellent. Well, again, I appreciate you joining me this evening. It's always good to talk to you, and
yeah, likewise.
I hope I see you again. I hope we see each other in person eventually.
I'm pretty sure we will, and I'm looking forward to your issue on William Wynne Westcott as well.
Yeah, awesome.
Which is in the works.
Yeah, November.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, thanks. Thank you, brother.
Thank you. Good speaking with you.